So this session will be recorded and will be shared out with everybody afterwards that registered. We also will make it public. So if there are, people that need this information that aren't here or didn't get the registration link, we will make it available to everybody as much as we can. I'm Valerie Lockhart. I'm the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce here in Albert Lea-Freeborn County. And if you have questions as we're going through today, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will try to get to things as we're going through, as Stephanie and Lynn and Kevin are kind of talking through things. But I will just request that everybody go on mute as much as possible to keep things quiet for our speakers, and then we'll get started. So I would like to introduce Stephanie Haedt, who is going to be talking to us about the Minnesota paid leave that's coming up.
All right.
Thank you for being here.
Val. All right. So first things first, Minnesota paid leave. You may have heard this by different names up to this point. It was previously called Minnesota Paid Family and Medical Leave. That name changed. So officially the name under the law is Minnesota paid leave. You'll see the different components will come into play as we move through this. But a few disclaimers before we get going for myself and my other presenters here. First things first, the information is current through last Friday. When we talk about some of the posters and notices that are online, they did do an update over the weekend, so more are now available. Also, in a presentation like this, I cannot give legal advice. So we're giving you generalities. This is the law, but make sure that you are working with your insurance agents, your accountants, your legal and professional advisors, that you know what paid leave is and how you're implementing it within your office. The other thing is we are drinking from a fire hose when it comes to paid leave. So the Department of Labor and Industry website and Department of Employment and Economic Development, both are pushing out a lot of information. Dig into their websites. There are FAQs, there's samples. There's a lot of information out there available to you. Make sure that you use that resource, and it is being updated very frequently at this point as we get close to implementation.
Can I jump in just one thing really quick, Stephanie, before you get into it? We will also share out after the fact a list of resources. You'll get some of the slides that Stephanie has tonight, and some links to things that will be additional resources so you know where to go. So just wanted to throw that in before we get started.
Thanks, Val. Okay, so just a little bit of background so everyone has a foundation as we move through. First, what is Minnesota paid leave and who is covered? Minnesota paid leave is a new system created by the state, and it's a leave entitlement with partial wage replacement and job protections for employees. The new system is being funded by premiums that will be paid by the employer and the employees in the state of Minnesota. To be very clear, paid leave is not your earned sick and safe time. Earned sick and safe time is a separate policy under the state. And then the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, which is your 12 weeks unpaid, that is also a separate. Now, these may run concurrently at times, but be advised that they are very different programs. So all employers in Minnesota and almost all employees will be covered. Full-time and part-time employees, most seasonal. There is a narrow exception that we will talk about. Owners and officers of companies that draw salary, agricultural workers, employees of religious organizations, temporary workers, student workers, employed family members, first responders, and elected and appointed officials. So that is pretty much everyone. Note that the seasonal exception is for hospitality, and we will get into that. It doesn't cover other seasonal employees, for example, in schools or agriculture, which are big in our area. So Val didn't touch on it, but in the document she's sending out, there'll be a QR code to provide feedback that they're going to take to the legislature and our governmental affairs committee with the chamber. And so those may be some issues you want to address if they're important to you. Okay, so who is eligible? To be eligible for benefits, an employee must have wage credits, at least 5.3% of the state's average annual wage. In 2026, that's going to be approximately $3,900. Now, you'll hear me say this a few times today. That will change annually, so just make note of that. So we're not talking a lot of wage before an employee is eligible. You will see from the definitions and kind of the threshold requirements for eligibility that the purpose really is to make it available to individuals. And so it's very encompassing for coverage. A note with regard to the benefits, even if individuals are receiving workers' compensation, they still may be eligible for paid leave. There would be a reduction in the amount of benefits. Social Security and unemployment benefits would probably make you ineligible for those paid leave benefits. So let's get into what is an employee. So an employee is a person who worked 50% or more in the prior year in Minnesota. Okay, so take pause with that and think about that. If you have an employee that moved, let's say you have an employee that is remote. Those are the types of scenarios you may want to analyze that. And then the other way is a person who does not work more than 50% in Minnesota, but lives in Minnesota. So perhaps you have a company where the employee is constantly on the road, salesperson all over the United States, but they live in Minnesota, they would be qualified.
Stephanie, we do
Who
have
is
one
not
question.
covered?
We
Yes.
had a question in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. The question is, does this include regular SSI too, or is just disability SSDI? So I think it's just disability, right?
Yes. Yep. Okay, who is not covered but may opt in? Independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and tribal nations. Not covered and cannot opt in, so there's no option to be involved, would be seasonal hospitality employees meeting the requirements, federal employees, and railroad employees. So as you can see, there's very few that aren't covered. So seasonal hospitality, and the key is you have to comply with both pieces. So the employee may not work more than 150 calendar days in the year. Okay, 150 days for the employee. And hospitality is limited to restaurants, hotels, lodges, resorts, mobile and seasonal food businesses, those types of things. Okay, so again, very, very narrow. It doesn't cover all seasonal employment. So if your business is one that your employees would fall under the seasonal hospitality requirement or exception, then there's some requirements. You must notify your employees at the time that they are hired that they are seasonal hospitality and do not qualify for paid leave. Okay. And then if at some point they would later qualify, so for example, they hit that 150-day threshold, at that point, then you must give them notice that now they qualify. All of this will be in your employer account, your UMI account. So if you are going to designate for that seasonal hospitality exception, you would do that within your account.
Stephanie, another question. Employee lives in Minnesota but works full-time in South Dakota with zero Minnesota wages, eligible or no? They would be eligible because they live in the state of Minnesota. So Brea, yeah, you would have to cover them under this paid paid leave because they live in Minnesota even though they work in South Dakota?
Well, it's in any one state. So if they live in Minnesota,
No, they live in Minnesota but work in South Dakota.
okay. Because if they work in South Dakota 100% of the time and live in Minnesota, then they would not qualify.
Okay, not qualifying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there has to be some level of working in the state of Minnesota. Okay.
Or yeah, because what they're trying to do is, I believe, is where you've got the 50%, not more than 50% in one state. It's those salespeople, right, that are living here, but they're going state to state to state to state, right? But if they're spending most of their time working someplace else, then they're probably covered under whatever that state benefits are. Okay. So Minnesota paid leave benefits. What are we talking about? What are the benefits? Applications for benefits are going to go through the state system. So your employees, when they have a qualifying event, will apply on the state system. As an employer, you're not going to handle those applications. The employees are required to give us notice, 7 days notice before they are going to apply. If they don't give us that notice, then their applications may be delayed up to 30 days. Okay. So an application for benefits based on a single event that lasts for 7 consecutive days. So what that means is the employee has an event. They have a car accident. Okay. They are unable to work. They're seriously injured. The first 7 days paid leave is not available. On day 8, now they would be eligible for paid leave benefits after they've made it through that 7-day eligibility period. Okay. This is where we talk about it's very different from ESST and paid leave. So in those 7 days, even though they're not getting paid leave benefits, they may be able to use ESST if it's available to them, PTO or other sick time that they have, other paid leave benefits. Okay, so 7 consecutive days, and then we have 2 reasons to get it. The first is one's own medical condition, serious health condition of yourself. This will include pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery from having a child. Okay, this portion will be important when we get on the tax piece later. So the medical piece, your own individual. The second piece is the family leave. And so the family would include any medical condition, bonding, safety, family care of one of your family members. It's not you yourself, okay? The family leave portion also includes the addition of that military piece that was added midstream, and that would be for a qualifying exigency or active duty orders. So each of these things have definitions. We'll run through them to lay a foundation for everyone. A family member, you will see that this definition is very expansive. Okay, we have spouse, we have children, whether they're adopted, biological, foster, step, they're all included. It also includes someone who you act as a parent to. So if you act as a parent to a child, let's say you're taking care of your nieces and nephews, that counts as your as a person under a family member for this definition. Parents, siblings, grandchildren, grandparents, son and daughters-in-laws, and any individual with whom you have a relationship that the expectation and reliance is you're going to take care of them. Again, the common theme, we're including as many people as possible within this definition for inclusion. Big practice note here. Minnesota paid leave definition of family is far more expansive than the family medical leave definition. So if you are a workplace where you are covered with both, you will need to analyze family under both definitions to determine applicability. All right, bonding leave. Bonding leave would be obviously birth, adoption of a child or placement of a foster care child. This is within 52 weeks of birth, adoption, or placement. So yes, that means if you have someone who has had this event in 2025, they may apply for benefits in 2026 to cover that birth, adoption, or placement. Okay. Let's say that someone, for some reason, does not qualify for Minnesota paid leave. They didn't have the wage threshold, or that would probably be the main one. Note, you still have to comply with the other Minnesota laws. So the Minnesota Pregnancy Leave Act is still in place. So if you have someone who doesn't qualify for paid leave, they still may be entitled to the 12 weeks unpaid under Minnesota pregnancy leave. And then the same may be true with FMLA. Again, we've got to analyze each one under the factors. And then when you write your policies and when we're implementing these leaves, we want to make sure we're running all of these concurrently as much as possible. Okay. Safety leave. Safety leave deals with domestic abuse, sexual assault, stalking of an individual or a family member. And so you can see it's very expansive again, whether or not it's to seek medical attention, crime victims services, psychological assistance, relocation assistance, or legal assistance. So again, a very broad window to get coverage for individuals. And then pretty self-explanatory, family care, a serious health condition of a family member. Okay, and we already talked about the definition of a family member. And then finally, your active duty or qualifying extingencies. This is your military leave and specifically includes National Guards and reservists. Okay, and it's not just active service, it's planning for events, whether homecoming or before they leave, they're prepping legal, spending time with family. Those all would be covered under this section. So when your employees make their applications online, you will get notice through your account. We do not have anything to do with that paperwork. If you dig on the state's website, you can actually see the certification forms are now on there. There are certification forms for all of these leaves except the military. On the military leaves, they will provide their orders, and that will suffice. Okay. I'm going to pause right there to see if we have questions on coverage. Or if Kevin and Lynn want to jump in. Okay. All right, so use of leave. Your leave for your own serious health condition is 12 weeks. If you have a family leave, that is 12 weeks. If there are 2 qualifying events in a year, you can get up to 20 weeks. So to be clear, your own serious health condition, 12 weeks, and then you have a baby, now you get 8 weeks. So a total of 20. If you have a serious health condition early in the year and then later in the year have a second serious health condition, you don't get the 20 weeks. Okay? So that's a nuance to understand. So the total leave can be capped at the 20 weeks. Leave can be used intermittently. So again, if you're used to federal family medical leave, it can be used intermittently. We will talk about that because we can limit that use. The state can require the employees to complete the certification forms. And then on all of these leaves, we are going to run them concurrently as much as possible. There was a big change with ESST this past year. Again, ESST is separate, but ESST, we cannot run concurrent. We cannot force an employee to run that concurrently. They would have that choice. So on intermittent leave, the statute says that intermittent leave can be used for up to the first 480 hours. That's 12 weeks. So when you're deciding on implementation within your workplaces, you need to designate in your policies if an employee qualifies for an additional 8 weeks to get to the 20 weeks. Are you going to allow them to use that second set of 8 weeks intermittently? Or are you going to require them to take it in a block of time? Okay, so you'll want to make sure that you discuss that within your workplace and make sure your policy is clear as to what you are allowing your employees to do. For your intermittent leave, it can be done on as small of an increment as you want. So let's say as small as what your time clock will allow. And the maximum requirement could be 1 day. So again, you want to think about your own workplace and what makes the most sense. If you're in some type of office setting, the smaller increments probably are fine and it doesn't matter. If you're in an industry where you have line workers or shift workers that are working together on a line or a project, you may want it in full day increments. So consider how you want to implement that
Stephanie,
and state that preference.
Stephanie, another question. With the 7-day eligibility, is it correct they will be paid those full 7 days after the 8th day? And it does go back to doesn't it go back to the first day that they were out that they'd get paid, correct? They just can't submit the claim till after the 7 days?
Oh, that's a good question. I thought the first 7 days were unpaid. I'd have to look at that
And we
because,
have that in the document?
huh?
Let me look and see if I have an answer to that.
Yeah, so I believe the first 7 days are unpaid, and then that's where the employees could elect to use the ESST, PTO, those types of things. Okay, partial wage replacement. So the paid leave system is not set up to give employees full wages while they're off. Employees will receive a portion of their wage. That portion will be 55 to 90% of the employee's wages, up to a cap, and that cap is the state's average weekly wage. So in 2026, that amount is $1,423. That amount will change annually. So again, stay on top of it. The way that falls out is your lower paid employees will receive a higher percentage of wage replacement. Your higher paid employees will receive a lower percentage of their wages. Okay. Now, the other thing that employers can decide in implementing their policies is whether they're going to allow this concept of a top off. And so what a top off is, it allows the employees to use ESST or PTO to fill in that gap between the partial wage replacement that they're going to get in the paid leave benefits up to potentially their full wages or some other amount that you say. I deal with the question earlier today, well, why would you want to do that? Potentially one of the reasons why is you want the employees to use up that time. So after they're gone for 12 or 20 weeks, they don't come back and now have a bank of PTO or ESST to use. The other reason you may want to use that is while an employee is on leave, the employer has to maintain their health insurance or group plan on the same terms and conditions as if the employee was still working. So if the employee is responsible for paying a portion of that health insurance, that top-off provision allows the employer on the back end to effectively pay those wages out, use them to cover employees' share of the health insurance without the employee paying it back. Okay, writing checks back and dealing with that. A clarification that was done over the last legislative session is that employees cannot receive more income while on leave than what they would receive if they were working. And so that is something to look closely at. I'm getting the question a lot, well, what about current short-term disability policies? Right? A lot of people are discontinuing them because, quite frankly, the paid leave benefits are far greater because it covers family and not just an individual. However, again, you want to analyze it in your own individual workplace. If your workplace has a lot of high salary individuals, the partial wage replacement may not even be close to what their salaries are. So do you want to continue to have a policy that's going to provide for them? But then you do the math on your end to decide, well, how much is that going to be? Because you don't want to overpay and get more coverage, then paid leave is going to reduce those benefits, right? The other thing is to consider, I have some businesses where we're considering, fine, we get rid of the short term, but then we're going to have long term. And so then we state in the policy, once all paid leave benefits are fully used, then this policy would jump in. So at that, I'm going to take a breath because Kevin and Lynn might have stuff to add to this one.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be really important to evaluate the benefits you provide. In particular, the most notable, if you have a group short-term disability plan, generally there'll be coordination of benefits with PFML. And you're going to see the benefit of that if you have someone that unfortunately has to take more than 20 weeks or the higher earners. I'll use the 20,000 pound gorilla of what is not going to coordinate benefits. Policies like an AFLAC policy, we've advised all of our clients that they should not sponsor AFLAC short-term disability or the colonials, et cetera, because they will not coordinate with the PFML. And I think it's going to be problematic for a lot of different reasons. So there are a lot of different nuances to this that as you really start to evaluate your benefit package, you may shift away from some long-term policies and emphasize some other things. Things that we've talked to our employers about is short-term disability probably won't affect the majority of groups that we work with, but you may want to convert that to something that might be more applicable, like a hospital plan. If someone's going to be out on PFML for a long period of time, they may have hospital needs, and a hospital plan could help them with those huge bills that we're talking about. So I think that there's a holistic question as to how to really evaluate your entire benefits package with PFML to basically make sure that your employees are taken care of.
Kevin, you have any questions or anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, for example, as Stephanie said, if you have high wage earners and they're only getting a 55% benefit, that's where that short-term disability policy might come in, because you might get that at 60 or 66%. So they would get an additional, 10 or 9% to help them get a little more income while they're out. And that's why that short term might be important. But if you have more of your employees on that 90% payout, well, then the short-term policy is probably not going to be effective because they won't get that. Except if they have another event, they exhaust all of this and they have another event, then short-term might come into play. So again, as Lynn and Stephanie said, I think you just got to look at it case by case and client by client.
Yeah, and one more thing on that is, if you think that there are a subsection of your employees that are higher earners that might not have a reasonable income replacement with the PFML, a lot of times you're not going to be able to probably be able to satisfy that with standard short-term disability. And you may want to look into like executive DI programs that may be more applicable if that's really your need.
That was going to be my question. Like, is there a way that they could provide certain coverages for, say, salaried employees or high level earners versus other, like, can you differentiate that way?
You can, and we're really talking about, higher earners, a lot of times, depending on the corporate structure, but business owners or really highly compensated employees, that executive disability program probably is going to be a much more applicable. It is more complicated. A lot of times there's individual underwriting and other things that go along with that. But if you're going to evaluate that and you feel like you have a subsection of employees, it'd be worthwhile exploring that to make sure that everyone's covered.
Thank you. Any questions before we move on? Okay. So the second part of the benefits under paid leave is the job protection component. And the job protection component says that after an employee is off on this paid leave, when they return, they are entitled to have their position returned to them. Their position, right? The exact same position or an equivalent position based on pay, overtime hours, shift differential, premium pay, hours, all of those things. There is no undue hardship exception for this. The employee gets returned to their position, period. Okay. One of the things that you want to do in implementing this and in best practices, be sure that if you're filling those positions while people are out rather than others assuming those duties, that you're advertising them as temporary positions, right? So that we don't run afoul or have problems, that they are temporary until the person returns. Now, of course, a lot can happen in 12 or 20 weeks. And so it's possible something else may move for the person you hired temporarily, but we have to be very careful that the person on leave is returned to that position. We also are prohibited as employers from taking any adverse action or retaliating or discriminating against an individual for applying for and obtaining paid leave benefits. If an employee is going to return early, so that's one of the things, employers are complaining about, like, well, how do we know when they're gone and how do we know they're going to come back? If they're going to come back sooner than what they were certified for, they are supposed to provide you 2 days notice. Okay. So as mentioned, there are a lot of resources online. I have the link here to the deed website. Be sure that you're looking at it. There's a bunch of information that will help you through this process. Okay, now we're going to move on to account registration, but before I do, any questions on benefits?
There is one in the chat, which is how are paid leave benefits paid for, but I believe that's what you're going to get into in this next section. So
yes, so we will get to that. We got to get our account set up and then we'll talk about funding it. So stay tuned. Okay, account registration. When I did this earlier today, it was a lot easier because I could just have people raise hands when I asked who has their account set up. And surprisingly, in that group of 20 plus people, only a handful had their accounts set up. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through this. You will need 2 accounts to manage your paid leave system. The first account is going to be your Minnesota Unemployment Insurance Employer account. This is the account where your quarterly reports are getting filed. So whomever is doing your payroll and filing your quarterly returns, they have this login information. So if this is, a username and a password that has maybe been around long before you, or someone who's no longer with the business, now is the time to update. You may have more than one person, so make sure that you get it updated, and whoever is going to be the paid leave administrator on your second account must be named in this first UIM account. Okay. Effectively, and this is right off of the website, your UIM account is going to handle all of the financials. So all of your quarterly reporting, how you're going to pay your premiums, everything for the financial piece is in this account. The paid leave website account is going to be where you're managing those leaves. So that's where you're going to see so-and-so applied for a leave. They're certified to be off until this date. All of those things, okay? There is a video online that walks you through setting up these accounts. There's also step-by-step instructions with screenshots and arrows of the buttons you click. It really is not that difficult. So if you haven't done it yet, go to the website. I've got the link in the materials, and then walk that through. Be sure that you name more than one person as a paid leave account administrator. And here's why. The paid leave account has a dual authentication. So if the person that is managing that account is on vacation and their Google Authenticator or Microsoft Office Authenticators on their cell phone, you can't get in unless you call them on vacation. So name someone. I mean, we had the question earlier today, well, what if you only have, one HR person? That's fine. But if that person's gone or unavailable, or heaven forbid, they're the one that had the serious health condition, someone else has to be able to get in. So at least set up another user so they can get in and access the information. There is the link. Val will push those out. The biggest thing to know, like if you set aside an afternoon and say, I'm going to set this up, it's going to take more than that, because once you set up the UIM account, they will email the email that you use to set up to designate as your paid leave administrator. And that will take up to 24 hours. So it appears that basically they batch these out overnight, and you'll get an email the next day. And then that person that you named in the UIM account as your paid leave administrator would get an email that says, you've been designated as a paid leave administrator. Click this link and set up your account. Okay. So once you do that, then you set up your paid leave account, which again is quite simple. The part that I'm seeing when people are calling and asking, they're getting stumped on the dual authentication. Like maybe they haven't done it before, they're having trouble getting the app to work. But if you already have a dual authentication app set up, it's quite simple. Okay. So the paid leave account is on a separate website, which is here. You'll get the email, click on it, set up your multi-factor authentication, and away you go. Each person that's named an administrator will have to go in and set up their own account. Questions on account setup? Okay. So now what? We've got the pieces. Now we go to implementation. So the implementation, the question of how are we funding this? So the initial rate for the paid leave is 0.88%. Under the statute, the employer must pay at least 0.44%, so half of it, and you can defer up to half of it to the employee. If you are a small those rates would drop. So for a small employer, you have to have fewer than 30 employees, and then there's a wage requirement. The average employee's wage must be less than or equal to 150% of the state's average wage in covered employment for the prior year. So that number is coming from your wage detail reports that were filed the previous year. Okay, so I've had that question where that's coming from. The other thing is, as you can imagine, the average annual wage changes every year. So you'll have to, I think it's a July 31. And so we'll find that out each year. So if you qualify for that small employer, then the employer side drops to 0.22. The employee side is still 0.44. Okay, so that rate is a total of 0.66. Now I've had questions saying, well, how do I go in and apply for the small employer exemption? There's no application process. Okay, the small employer exemption will be applied based upon your quarterly filings. And that should not be mistaken with kind of the loan and grant process that they have in place. But that application comes after someone qualifies for benefits. So let's say you are a small employer and you do have to pay those out. There are funds set aside in the system to help small employers comply with this or help fill with a temporary employee during that time. So you might be able to fill out a grant application after someone has qualified for benefits. Okay, now employers may pay more than the minimum rate that they're required to pay, more than the half, but there are tax implications to that. Okay, so when it comes to medical, remember we've got two categories. Okay, your own serious health condition is medical. When those benefits are paid out, those are considered wages for tax purposes, right? For the family side, they're not, but if the employer pays a portion of that, then they can be taxed as wages. So it gets really complicated. I don't get to give tax advice, but we'll talk about it at the end with some examples of what is being posted on the website. Again, these rates change annually on July 31, and unlike unemployment, your rate does not depend on if it's used within your workplace. Your rate is based upon the statewide rate that they set. So it's based upon whomever is using it within the state and how much money is in the fund. So one of the recommendations I'm making when you're implementing this into your workplace, do not put exact percentages into your policies, because that means you're updating your policies every single year, and no one wants to do that. So you can say something generally like, we will share it half and half, but be careful, because then if you qualify for the small employer, are you now doing 0.33? And so I like just general language to say the premiums will be shared based upon applicable law between the employer and the employee. And then you do your notice, we'll get to the notice requirement, and you state what that rate's going to be. And if that rate changes the next year, do a new notice to put people on notice. So then you're not constantly having to update your policy. Okay. So determining the split between the employer and the employee, determine how it's going to be handled. Up to 1/2 can be deferred. There is a calculator online that will help you calculate that. So if you want to see what those numbers are going to look like, the links in the materials. And then the actual, I mean, this is an estimate, right? The actuals will be on your wage detail reports that you are submitting. Question on the premium rates. Comments? My gut is that these premiums are only going to go up. So that's why I think you want to be very careful in deciding what you put in your policy and how you roll this out. You can always change it. Legally, you can change that split, but consider about the morale issues in your workplace. If you say, we're going to pay it, and then next year it goes up a full 1%, and then you say, well, now we're not going to pay it anymore. Okay. So to each their own, but be thoughtful and think through these things as you're setting up your policies.
To Stephanie's point, as far as premiums, we've, I would say, Kevin, what do you think? We've had probably 100 different employers that have quoted PFML and had it individually underwritten. We've seen rates anywhere from 0.44% all the way up to almost 3%. And so you can really imagine those employers that are getting the 0.4s, the 0.5s, they're all looking at the private market and effectively taking the low risk and putting it in the private market. The higher risk is going on the public side.
Right.
With that, you can only assume that the rates are going to be higher as this continues to evolve and if the underwriters are correct. So to Stephanie's point, I think that looking at your workforce and those lower rates, there's usually two very important factors from an underwriter perspective. As we'd mentioned, the income replacement for those higher earners and the probability of them using it are lower. So those with higher base incomes are seeing lower rates. And then those that have a primarily female-oriented workforce, and especially female-oriented that may be of birthing age, it is much higher. So if you look at your workforce and you see those things, those are some key indicators as to whether you might find preferred rates in the private market versus the public market.
Right. So when we're talking private versus public, there is an option to not use the state-funded plan, and you can do an equivalent plan. And we will get to that because I do want to talk about that in a bit. Okay, so what do we need to do right now? Employee notices and posters need to go out by December 1st. So you got a few weeks here. The required poster is online. I've got a link. There are also, and the posters are available in 5 languages. And the English version looks like this, so you know what you're looking for. This is a really good document. They did a good job. It simplifies, it provides a very good explanation for your employees about exactly what is going to happen. Okay, this is what paid leave is, and this is what we're rolling out. There are also sample notices online as well. Those sample notices are right now only available in English, but the remaining notices, they say, are forthcoming. And then as we kind of alluded to before in this discussion, I strongly recommend you get an acknowledgement from your employees that they received these notices. So if there's ever an audit or a question of if you told them, you have this available to you. That may take the form of adding an acknowledgement on the bottom of your notice. If you have some type of intranet system where employees can check a box electronically that they read it or electronically sign, or it may be when you have a meeting, you have a roll call and they sign in to everyone in that meeting and you attach the forms that were given to everyone during that meeting, right? So those are some examples of how you can implement this and cover your bases. The sample notices, there's 2 versions. One is the 0.88%, so the full notice. The other one is for the small employer notice, the 0.66. Obviously, we don't know definitely where you will fall because it's based on wage detail reports. I have been unable to determine in whatever calculator the state is going to use if they are averaging total wages from the wage detail report divided by total number of employees for their average, or if they're going to do average wage for each employee, which could give you drastically different results. So again, stay tuned for future guidance on that. All right, so we've got our poster, we've got our notices. Now we need to draft our policy. So with your policies, you are going to want to make sure you have the basic information. A lot of what we've already talked about in this slide. Okay, what does it cover? How do you qualify? Then the functionality of it. Who do you report to? How do you report to them so that people know that you're going to be on leave? Determine your preferences for that intermittent leave, as we talked about, and state in your policy what is the increment of that incremental leave, and can they use it for the full 20 weeks or only the first 12, and then the last 8 have to be in a block? Again, the top off theory, state in your policy if employees will be allowed to use other paid leave benefits to top off during this time. Remember with your ESST, with the law change last year, we cannot require they top off with ESST. We can say they may, but we cannot require them to do so. If you have a true vacation policy, which doesn't cover time off for sick, then you can compel that. But otherwise, it's a may. Update other policies that may be affected by this. If you are changing a benefit package, you're taking away short-term disability. Maybe you have a pay policy that says, and you list out, here's all the deductions that may come out of your paycheck. Make sure paid leave is listed. Make sure, like on your Minnesota pregnancy and parenting leave, on your FMLA, we're adding language to say, apply for paid leave benefits if applicable, and we're going to run all leaves concurrently. So really go through those handbooks, clean them up, and make sure that we've got everything current and up to date as of when this rolls out on January 1. Questions on handbooks, policies? This is really hard when I don't get to see and read faces. All right.
Stephanie, just one more question. Angela had a question about, how are these paid? How are the paid leave benefits paid for? And I just tried to do in the chat, just saying, if you're underneath the state program, you're going to make payment to the state at the end of each quarter. So your first payment will be in April. And I just tried to use an example. Let's say the premium is $100 that's owed, and you're going to split it. The employer pays 50, the employee pays 50, and then that gets paid for at the end of every quarter. If, just a simple math equation, but that's how you would deduct it. And all employee payments would be paid after tax. So you deduct it from their payroll after tax.
You're one step ahead of me. That's where we're going.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Are your payroll systems ready? The answer to this question right now is likely not, right? They are scrambling to make sure that they can account for this new system. So make sure you are working with your payroll professionals and that you are ready to roll this out or will be ready to roll this out effective your first payroll in January of 2026. And so as Kevin was explaining, the payments are going to come out quarterly, but the withholdings from your employees start January 1 of 2026. So they come out, you do your quarterly wage detail reports as you have been under your UIM account. So January, February, March, that report is due April 30th, and your payments would be due at that time as well. Now with your equivalent plans, the deadline for that equivalent plan to start January 1 has already passed, but you may still put an equivalent plan in place for a later start date. So when Kevin and Lynn are talking about maybe evaluate your workplaces, if these premiums go up year over year, it's something you may want to consider. And I've got a slide, we'll talk about those in a minute. So 2026 and beyond, properly document all leaves. Your HR professionals are going to have their hands full. This might even mean a new HR professional. You have to carefully document all of your leaves to make sure everyone's getting leave that they're entitled to, continue to file those reports, and then pay those premiums. So the equivalent plans. Equivalent plan means you are not going to pay into the state-funded system, but your equivalent plan must meet or exceed all of the requirements of the state paid leave system. In order to do that, you have two options. The first is a self-funded or self-insured plan, which will have to be secured by a bond. I'm telling you to be very, very, very careful if you choose this. I really don't recommend it at all, and here's why. You may have very generous vacation, PTO, sick leave policies, but you may have several employees out at the same time. You may have an employee that qualifies in multiple years. So yes, they have a great sick bank. They qualified for 20 weeks in 2026, but then worked enough to be eligible in 27, and now they had another major issue, right? Can you withstand and cash flow all of that? Be thoughtful. The other option, as we've heard Lynn and Kevin talk about, is this private insurance carrier option. There are several plans and carriers that have already been approved by the state. And there's a list of them online. You can work with your insurance agents, they will help you. There is a fee to apply. So in your paid leave administrator account, you can file that application for an equivalent plan in there. Based upon the size of your business, that's your application fee. And then you get approval for that equivalent plan to run it in place of paid leave. So then instead of paying the money to the state, effectively business, you are paying that for your insurance plan. And then when claims are made, you have perhaps the luxury of maintaining those internally, right? Rather than dealing with the state system. So Lynn and Kevin, I'm going to let you guys chat because this is your wheelhouse.
Well, we do have a couple of things on our slides that we'll talk to in a little bit, but I think that it really comes down to how you're going to look at your benefit package. We've seen, I think we're the 14th state that has implemented a similar program to this, and there have been different levels of success on a state-run program. And so I think that most employers are looking at a private option, are really concerned about that. And they also are concerned about their benefit package. One of the nice things about the private side is that if you have a situation where someone might qualify for some of these leaves, you can effectively hire an outside entity to basically adjudicate and then put them into the proper program. And if they go from PFML to potentially there's a short-term disability payment to potentially go into long-term disability, hopefully not, but life, accident, hospitalization, all those type of plans can be adjudicated with one interaction, is really what we're seeing as the value proposition if you're looking at the private insurance. So I think that you're going to look at it and say, okay, is there administrative burden that can be relieved for you or the employee? And then is there a cost component that makes sense for you as well? And all of those situations are completely uniquely underwritten. And so if you're looking at that, really, you're looking at an implementation at this point for April 1st or later. And most of the time, it takes about 2 to 6 weeks, depending upon how busy they are. I'm guessing now you would actually be able to get a quote back in probably 2 weeks if you're interested.
We did have someone earlier in the meeting that said that they went with their own private plan, but when all was said and done with the application fee to the state and everything, it wiped out any savings that they would have had versus the state plan. So I think you have to run the numbers for your business and see what makes sense.
You do. And I think that two things. I think to Stephanie's point, I think we've kind of talked about this. I think if you're looking at it and saying, where do we want to be as far as kind of if we can qualify for the private insurance option, because there's individual underwriting, I think that those have a higher probability of being more stable. And then it's really the administrative side of it. We look at this. I've had a few employers that have more than double the state rate because they feel very strongly that the private side is going to be more efficient for them and their workforce. I can't say that. I know that, the estimates from the private carriers is that they'll adjudicate claims within 3 days. The state has basically stated that they're going to do it within 7 days. And, not a big difference, but if you're in need of money and on disability, those couple of days and trying to get your money could make a big difference to an employee. So those are the type of conversations I think you should be looking and considering if you're looking at other options besides the public option.
And just so we don't forget, there is another question from Molly. Just says, are we able to require folks to take vacation? Their policies that they have a split, they have vacation and sick separate. So yep. Stephanie.
So long as they cannot use their vacation for sick, yes, you can require it. If it is more of a PTO, where it's like you can use it for whatever, then it's going to fall under kind of the same restrictions of ESST if they can use sick for it. So true vacation, you can require it. Okay, this is where I ask if I have any accountants available that want to talk. All right, so my insurance doesn't allow me to give accounting advice. But what I have here is the information straight off of the state's website. Okay, so they did put out some guidance. The link is here again, we'll provide it, but consult with your accountants. Make sure that they're another valuable piece of your team. We, didn't have an accountant that could join us tonight, but like lawyers and insurance agents, your accountants are a key component to this. So make sure you're having a dialogue with them as well. So the benefits, how will they be taxed? Paid leave benefits are taxed. And the federal government's going to treat family leave and medical leave differently. We kind of tipped on this before. Family leave benefits are not considered wages and therefore not subject to employment taxes. For the medical leave benefits, again, this is for the employee themselves on a serious health condition. They will be treated two different ways. So on that, the employer contribution will be treated as wages as taxable because obviously it's a wage replacement, right? That makes sense. And then the employee's contribution is excluded from the employee's federal gross income and is not taxable. And then they had the rates, 33% for medical and 50%. When an employee applies for benefits through the state, so again, this is the state plan, not the private insurer, they will have forms where they can elect if they want these taxes withheld from their benefits. So they can have them withheld before they are paid. So what is our responsibility then as the employer for the medical benefits? The state will provide us with the information on a quote frequent basis. I have to assume that this is going to come through your employer's accounts, right? You will see that information come through. I don't know how frequent that will be. You are required to pay Social Security, Medicare taxes on the medical benefits portion, and that will have to appear on the W-2s. So, of course, in true fashion, the W-2s have not been updated yet. We are being told that you will put that in box 14 on the W-2s. And because they have different tax treatment, you can separate out the paid medical leave amount and the family leave amount on those forms. So I don't know if I have any accountants or payroll people in the room that wanted to add, but that is the premiums. And then, of course, we get the question, are they deductible? And you're way beyond what I can advise on, but there is guidance on the website if you want to go out and look at that and discuss with your accountants. There. Again, as the employer, all of this information will be in your paid leave account. So your administrator that you designate will be able to review that for you. So that concludes the paid leave portion. I have a few bonus materials, but let's take any further paid leave questions.
Feel free to unmute if you want to just ask a question now, or you can put it in the chat, either way.
Like I said, lots of moving parts. Things are changing pretty consistently. The paid leave system went down over the weekend and they updated more information. There is a spot where you can sign up for newsletters. They're issuing new FAQs. So just really keep an eye on things and reach out to your professional associates if you have questions and implementing.
Hey, Steph, I do have one question regarding the use of the vacation or sick. The
Yes.
few webinars that I've been on, they've all advised to not use or not require PTO, sick, or vacation be used. Has something changed that you're able to require them to use, that you can require them to use vacation now?
Well, what has changed is the ESST update. So last legislative session and guidance that came out, the ESST update basically said, if you have a greater pool of time available to employees upon which they may use for sick time. So think back to when we implemented ESST. A lot of businesses are like, I don't want to micromanage this anymore. I don't want to have to know what you're on leave for. You're either here or you're not. And so they had a big pool of time off called PTO, and you could use it for sick, you could use it for vacation. If you needed to go to school conferences, you used your PTO for any time you were away from the office. Well, this change now says that if it's available to be used for sick time, that entire pool receives the protections of ESST. Okay? And ESST, you cannot require an employee use it. So that's the difference. If they can use it for sick, we cannot require. It's a may. So your policy will say you may use it to supplement. But if it's a true vacation where they cannot use it for sick, you can say must. They must use it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. And that's a big change. I mean, I have some employers now going back to splitting it up because it's not just this issue, it's all of the benefits. So, you can't require them to find a replacement, and, basically they can let you know at any time. All of those requirements, and of course the job protection, those types of things qualify. The way I'm advising people to deal with that is if an employee chooses not to use their sick time, then that's a disciplinary issue, right? Because then they're calling in and they're not sick. So if you have an attendance occurrence program or anything like that. So you have to be careful, but if they're not going to use it, they don't have the protections. The other ESST change is funeral leave. So they added another reason why you could use ESST leave. And the funeral leave, it isn't just a funeral, but it includes funeral arrangements, addressing financial or legal matters when a member of your family dies. So again, look at, do we still want to have a standalone funeral leave policy or bereavement policy? Are we just going to wrap it into ESST? Or you still have this policy, but you say if you need more time off, then use your ESST. So just take a look at those policies, make sure to update them. And then the last piece of the break laws are changing effective January 1. So no longer do we have sufficient and reasonable requirements, which are, fuzzy. We now have very specific requirements. So employees will receive a paid 15-minute break within, and you'll see within is underlined, each 4 consecutive hours worked. Okay. So if you have someone that starts in the morning and they work 3.5 hours and then they go on their lunch break, they do not get a paid 15-minute break. A lot of policies now generically say you may use the restroom, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. So look at those. The problem is most of us don't want to micromanage this, but there's always, that person that's going to abuse it. So it is within. So think about how you want to set those up. The second piece is on the meal break. It is unpaid 30 minutes after 6 consecutive hours worked. Okay, the prior law said 8. So 6 consecutive hours equals 30 minutes unpaid. They must be completely relieved of duties. If not, you must pay it. If they get called back, and this is not a change in law, this is based on prior. If they get called back and the break is under 20 minutes, then it's paid. So with this new law, the burden of proof is on us employers, right? That we gave them the opportunity to have this meal break. And you can guarantee when you have a disgruntled employee, they're going to say, well, they never gave me my breaks, right? So you got to make sure to plan for this. So in your policy state, if you miss a break, you need to notify your supervisor. If you get called back, within 20 minutes of leaving from break, notify your supervisor so we can adjust your pay. There is a way to waive these. I have to say, be very careful. And then you need to seek legal counsel to do that. But I am basically advising some people where we have, issues, because if they're not taking their breaks, again, you got to treat it as a disciplinary issue. But consider whether or not in your time clock system or when they turn in timesheets, they're acknowledging, I had an opportunity to take my meal break today, right? Because that's the key. Because what happens is the Department of Labor comes in and they're like, no break, no break, no break. That's a fine every day. So just be careful, be thoughtful. That's all I've got, unless there are more questions.
All right. I don't see any. Lynn, do you want to share
Yep,
the
sure,
slides
I
that you
can.
have?
Yep. I mean,
I think it's all yours, Lynn.
okay. All right, is my screen sharing? Okay, wonderful,
Yep,
you
we
guys.
gotcha.
I can see
First
it.
of all, I think that Stephanie did a wonderful job explaining this. I think that it is really important to understand that this is evolving. There are going to be more questions, as we start to really implement this. Payroll systems and things like that, most of them are not prepared right now. And if they are, it's a little bit of a cumbersome process. So, do your best to prepare and get ready for this. We know that there's a lot of questions out there, and we'll continue to work through the chamber to get any information out there for you guys. But I do have something here that I think is this important for you guys to know. As we all are aware, our providers in Albert Lea area from a medical standpoint have been a little bit challenging and become more and more challenging. So we have a couple of exciting things we want to make sure you're aware of. Coming for 2026, there are going to be 2 new providers that you may, as an employer or potentially individually, may want to be aware of to look at as either an offering to your employees or even for yourself personally. The first one is called Healthcare Clinic. We'll go into the details with these, but I do want to make sure you're aware. This is a brick and mortar. Think of the old Family Doctor scenario. They're going to be taking over the old VA space at the Skyline Mall and are anticipating to be up and running in December and no later than the 1st of 2026. I'll get in a little bit more details on this. It is something where you can have different levels of memberships, and you can do that directly, or it can be sponsored at a discount through employers. And if you are looking at doing that as an employer, depending upon your size, there may be ways that you can have some significant potential savings within your health insurance. So that's something that is really exciting, I think, for some of the larger employers in particular, and for members of the community just in general. The other one is called Kavira. And this is by corporate membership only. And what it essentially is, if you've used Doctors on Demand, Virtuwell, any of these virtual applications to diagnose sicknesses for you or your family, and then they send a prescription or give you treatments over a virtual application, that is where Kavira starts. The thing that is really unique about Kavira is if they're unable to diagnose you, they will in fact send someone to your home or office to meet with you individually, perform tests, lab work, and even x-rays if that's appropriate. One thing that is really cool here is Kavira does have a $675 minimum fee. As we were working and wanting to introduce this, one of the things they were willing to do is to launch their program. They're waiving that fee if anyone is interested as an employer to be part of that. And they just want to make sure that you are signing those agreements before the first year. The general rule, there is difference. You have mental health services, but in general, the cost for Kavira is $27 per covered person per month. So that $675 is effectively 25, I believe, covered employees. So they're waiving that minimum of 25 employees for anyone that's interested. The other thing that's important with this, same thing, there is a more direct way to get insurance premium savings with Kavira. If you are either a self-insured or level funded plan or a fully insured large group, meaning more than 50 employees, depend upon your insurance carrier, you get an automatic either 1.5% to 3% discount off your fully insured rates. With anyone that we've put this in for, though, that discount more than pays for the first year premium for Kavira. Getting a little bit more detail here, I do want to make sure that people are aware of this. The big beautiful bill signed this summer changed direct primary care. They used to be considered an insurance plan on their own. They're no longer that. That is a very important differentiation for a number of reasons. Probably the most applicable to the average person is there's no longer required cost share if you're an HSA contributor. So that is something that's going on. This started in February 2022. They have almost 2,000 employees. Of that, over 200 of them are either living or closer to Albert Lea than they are to their Austin location. And they're looking obviously to expand. This is, I think, is a really exciting element. And then I know this is short notice, but if you are available and interested, they're having a formal presentation and kickoff at Wedgwood tomorrow, starting at 6:30. That includes a documentary on the state of the healthcare, as well as a question and answer with the founder who will be there to kick this off. Really encourage you, if you're interested, taking the time to go there. I think is a really great opportunity for the right fit. Kavira, I just wanted to put a little bit of more meat on the bone here. This does include some things like prescription medications. The prescription medications that are provided at no cost are non-narcotic generics. A great example of how this works is that if you have someone that comes and you have a strep throat test, they can come to your office, home or office, run a test, do a rapid strep test, and then they can either order a medication, which most of us wouldn't want to in that case, but they can send that to your local pharmacy so you get your medication. So in that case, you have to pay for a prescription, but you can have up to 300 different free prescriptions with the service. So it's really a kind of a great opportunity. I've added their most common conditions that they treat. I do want to make sure that you understand if you add mental health services, most of the folks we work with have not done that because EAP programs and things like that are usually covering that for you, but that is available and is virtual in nature, which once again, if you're looking for mental health services in Albert Lea, that's usually a difficult thing to find. So might be of some interest, but it certainly is a pretty encompassing environment here that provides a really great opportunity to get some of those treatments done. The other thing that I think is important is they have a 90% same day in-person visits, but they do require 4 hours, and they see individuals up until 7 o'clock Monday through Friday. So wanted to make sure you guys are aware of that. If you're interested in those, I did give some information to the chamber office. We can get you in contact or help you understand this a little bit more. We want to make sure that everyone was aware of these, as we all are struggling with costs and providers in the area.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lynn, for that. I think any ways that we can figure out ways to save costs on one hand as we're expanding costs in others, we can find ways to offset some of those things and make it easier burden on our businesses. So I really appreciate that. The only thing left for me, from my standpoint, that I want to make sure we touch on again, is that we are going to be collecting feedback from businesses over the next year, at least. So as these things roll out, as you're starting to engage with the system, as you're seeing how it actually impacts your business, we want to hear those things from you and collect that information so we can get that back to the state, so that they know how these things are actually impacting business. So I put a link in the chat. It'll also be in the information that we send out afterwards. So please save that, earmark it, just so you have it. And once you start to get into things, if you're, hitting roadblocks or these things are really impacting your business, we want to know that so we can share it. So otherwise, thank you all so much. Thank you, Stephanie, for all the information. Thank you, Kevin and Lynn, for weighing in. We can open it up. I know we have a few more minutes if other people have questions that you want to talk about. But thank you all for being here and for learning with us.
Thank you all for presenting tonight. It was very good information. We appreciate the local support from all of you to guide us through these changes. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, if there's nothing else, we can have some time back. So, thank you all so much. And if you have questions, just let us know and we'll keep going from there.
Thanks, everyone.